our roundtable, entitled Human Reproduction and the Impacts of Reincarnation, current subjects that often lead to a lot of questions from everyone. For this discussion, we would like to introduce the moderator, Turri. Turri resides in Orlando, Florida, with his wife, Christiane, and his three beautiful daughters, Gabriella, Juliana, and Cecilia Turri. Is a Spiritist speaker and a part of the team of Spiritist workers at the Peace and Knowledge Spiritist Center. Professionally, Dr. Turri is a director of audiology for the village's health system. Please welcome Turri.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Isn't this a wonderful event? Yes, awesome. So we're going to get started. I'd like to invite our three panelists to the table. We'll introduce them individually as they get up to speak, but please welcome now, together as a group, Jussara Korngold, Sonia Doi, and Nahur Fonseca. Nahur. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. Thank you. So let's first introduce, and I'm sorry, just a brief note. These folks, they're all experts, right? They have a lot of knowledge, but please know they're going to give a short talk. It'll be an overview. You will have questions, and that's why we will have questions later, all right? We'll do some today at the end of the talk, but please don't think you're going to become an expert in the subject in 5 minutes. It's a nice overview to get you started, okay? So let's talk about Jussara Korngold. Most of you have seen her before. She's going to talk about fertility. Jussara has a Bachelor's of Science and an MBA degree. She is the founder and president of the Spiritist Alliance for Books, SAB for short, which is a nonprofit organization which has the aim to promote and disseminate Spiritism in English, as codified by Allan Kardec. Mrs. Korngold is also one of the founders and president of the Spiritist Group of New York, located in Manhattan. Mrs. Korngold is also a published author and has been translating Spiritist materials and books since 1993. Jussara Korngold is currently the president of the United States Spiritist Federation, executive director of the Tri-State Spiritist Federation, and she is the executive director of the International Spiritist Federation. Mrs. Korngold is fluent in Portuguese, English, French, and Spanish. Mrs. Korngold has been working as a volunteer in the Office of Brazil Child Health in New York City since its opening in 2000, as its main executive. So please welcome Mrs. Korngold to the podium, or to the microphone.
Hi, hello everyone. So I have the difficult task to speak after lunch, but that's no problem at all. So today, as they was just explaining to us, we are going to be giving a brief introduction about the three topics in terms related to human reproduction and impacts on reincarnation. And then we have the frequently asked questions that are going to be probably addressing all the ideas and questions that you may have. So for starters, we are going to be talking about fertility. When we are talking about reincarnation in a symposium such as this one, of course, we have to talk about the different ways that spirits are going to return to matter. This is not supposed to be a sex ed class, so don't worry about that. Actually, we are going to be talking about ways of reincarnating that do not involve sex, okay? And the first one is actually about fertility. We know that there are many couples that have been experiencing problems with infertility, and this can cause a great impact in the life of the couple. And it is recognized as being a disease according to the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. Why, sometimes, what are the reasons that may impact for the couple to be able to have a child? So there are many reasons that can cause infertility. Mostly, of course, we will see science talking about the physical reasons that we may have that may hinder the possibility of the couple to have a child, such as hormonal, ovarian, uterine, advanced age, some of the things that you can see here, like sexually transmitted diseases, poor nutrition. But as spiritists, we know that there are many other reasons that may impact the possibility of having a child. It can be emotional problems, it can be spiritual problems. For instance, we see in the book, Missionaries of the Light, we can actually see the example of the spirit Segismundo that wants to reincarnate, but the father-to-be had a different problem with him, and so he was impacting, without knowing, the production of his sperms. The male factors may include low sperm count and abnormalities. The female factors, problems with ovulation, thyroid, cysts, or any other problem or obstructions that may happen in the fallopian tube as well. So infertility is actually much more a serious problem than we can imagine. So up to 10% of infertility cases cannot be explained. There are, at least in this country, 80 million people that, here worldwide, that have been facing problems with infertility. And it's the way for us to treat, and the doctors to treat that, is actually in a possibility of working with in vitro fertilization or any other kind of treatment that may happen. Okay, so it's what we call either in vitro fertilization, IVF, or ART, which is assisted reproductive technology. Is when, for those who are not familiar with the process, when the couple is having problem in having children, they remove eggs from the woman after a prolonged treatment, and they will be removing sperm from the male partner and do the meeting of the two of them in laboratory and putting the egg back in the woman wombs. The reason I actually, when we were preparing this topic, that I wanted to talk about it, because I live that. And so I went through the in vitro fertilization, and so I know how hard it is and how difficult it is for the couple even to have to overcome a lot of the insecurity that may happen with that. But one thing that I would like to say, even though we are just talking about infertility and treatments, that if there is always another excellent option for those who would like to be parents, and that is adoption. So adoption, when we adopt a child, we are actually embracing a child that it was supposed to be our own. So if you do have any problem in terms of fertility, do not hesitate about considering the possibility of adoption. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jussara. So now we have the pleasure to present Dr. Sonia Doi, who will introduce and discuss the topic of genetics. Sonia Doi is currently serving as president of the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society of Maryland, the U.S. Spiritist Medical Association, and the International Spiritist Medical Association. Professionally, she holds an MD, a PhD, and is an adjunct associate professor of medicine at the Uniformed Services University. Dr. Doi is also a member of the board of directors of the National University of Natural Medicine. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Doi.
Thank you. So before I start, I'd like to make a disclaimer. My name is Sonia, but I'm not Julio's mother-in-law that he was talking about. Although, that doesn't mean I'm any better. I'm trying now here to go to the next slide. There, okay. Okay, I have the task of, in brief, few minutes, give you an overview of genetics and how it affects the reincarnation. So, bear with me, okay? The genetic code is the information that we carry in every cell that gives the instruction to how our body is structured and how it functions. It is present in every cell carried by chromosomes, as you see there. The chromosomes are made of DNA, and DNA, as you see depicted here, is a long structure, is double-stranded and intertwined along each other. So in this picture here, you see a representation of DNA with its building blocks called nucleotides. And there are only 4 nucleotides that in a specific sequence gives rise to what we call genes. And genes is what carries the features of our body. So for every 3 building blocks of DNA, 3 nucleotides, that codes for another type of building block called amino acid, which then will form every protein that we have in our body, proteins that form our skin, our bones, our organs, our blood, every fluid in our body. So that's how the genetic code is carried through. And here you see a representation. Actually, this is a microphotograph of a cell with the chromosomes inside stained in blue. And on the other side, you see the representation of 46 chromosomes. The human being, the cells of the human being, every cell has 46 chromosomes arranged in pairs, so 23 pairs. The only exception to this rule are the female and the male reproductive cells. So the reproductive cells have only 1 copy of each chromosome, so they carry 23 instead of 46. But during fertilization, the male cell penetrates the female cell, bringing its 23 chromosomes that together with the 23 of the female, then give rise to another cell with the complete program with the whole package of 23 pairs of chromosomes. And that's what's going to give rise to the embryo, to the fetus, and the baby to be born. So until some time ago, we believed that everything in our body is coded by the DNA. So everything was determined by the sequence of DNA that we carry, the genetic code. But this came to an end, and we call that the end of supremacy, of DNA supremacy, because the scientists discovered that are phenomena that can change how DNA is expressed, modulate the DNA, how the DNA then codes for the features of our body. And you may not have heard of the word epigenetics, but I'm absolutely sure you have used the concept, because so many of us know that there are some type of food, especially fruit and all this, that are beneficial for our health, that can help to prevent cancer, right? How many of you have already that knowledge? Yeah, and then there are some types of food that we say, well, be away from this type of food because they can actually make it easier for you to develop cancer. Because DNA only carries we can have a propensity for one disease or for a healthy status. But then there are other factors that will influence this propensity so that we can have a healthy status or develop a disease. So here is like a scientific illustration of how epigenetics work, and you have to memorize this for a quiz. So now I just brought this as an illustration. There are several types of elements, type of products that can affect how the DNA is expressed. And we know, for example, by food or by some chemicals, but don't we know that there are other factors? How many of us know that meditation is beneficial for health, for preventing diseases? How many of us have heard that charity is good for health, right? So we already use the concept without even knowing this whole process here. So there are things that impact on how DNA works and is expressed. So in identical twins, the package of DNA is exactly the same. It's divided. The same package is divided in two and goes to the twins. So imagine the information is the same. So we look at the twins and they look exactly the same. But are they exactly the same? Are they identical? No. I knew two doctors that were twins. They were absolutely identical. I could not recognize one from another. The only way I could recognize them was by passing by on the hallway. They were from different divisions, different specialties, but by passing by, I would say hi. One of them would open a big smile and say, "Hi, how you doing?" The other one, you say hi, and he goes, "Hi," and keeps on going. So they were, outside identical, but the personality is different. And why is that? We all know. For each one of us, we are individual spirits. So it doesn't matter what the shell is. We are individual spirits. And even when we have exactly the same DNA, we are different. And I would invite you, we are going to talk a little bit about more about the Missionaries of the Light, but I would invite you, if you have not read it, because it has the most amazing explanation of how the Spirit comes, joins the body in that moment of fertilization, all the planning that takes for that moment, all the planning that then will, put the spirit in that shell that we call the human body. And what is the importance, not only from the DNA, but from the perispirit that comes with this spirit. But we're going to talk more about it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Doi. Our next speaker is Nahur Fonseca. I apologize. He's going to talk to us about a very current and an intriguing subject called human cloning, which I'm fascinated with. Mr. Fonseca, Dr. Fonseca, has a PhD in computer science from Boston University. He migrated to the United States in 2002 to pursue his doctorate and has been an active contributor to the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society of Massachusetts, as well as the Spiritist movement in the United States of America. Ever since, in 2003, along with other Spiritist educators, he organized the first meeting of youth Spiritist educators of the Northeast, uniting a dozen Spiritist centers. The next year, they organized the first Family Spiritist Retreat, an annual event that has brought more than 300 families together over the past 12 years. Dr. Fonseca has also collaborated with the Spiritist Magazine, Kardec Radio, and many regional events, including the 3rd U.S. Spiritist Symposium in 2009 in Boston. So after 8 years, welcome back. It's nice to have you. Please, welcome.
Thank you all for the invitation. So I am the other kind of doctor. So I don't really, the only viewers that I'm familiar with are the viewers of computers that I try to get rid of. So the topic of human cloning, which is very fascinating as all reminded us, really became popular with this sheep, the Dolly sheep. That's how it came to the forefront of pop culture. So I just wanted to explain very briefly what is cloning and what the process involves. So cloning is a process of making a genetically identical organism through non-sexual means, as Jussara reminded us in the beginning. So what happened with the Dolly experiment is there is a subject that you want to clone, and in this picture it's going to be the sheep with the white face in the middle. So from that sheep, you extract any cell. I think they used a mammalian cell, and from that they extract the DNA information, the nuclear information. Okay, so they keep that. That would be the red material in the picture. From the donor sheep to the sheep that's going to actually carry the baby or the new organism, you take an unfertilized egg. So that will be the egg without the sperm. So just unfertilized egg. And you remove from that egg the DNA information. So now the DNA from the host animal is out of the picture, and you insert via some electric impulses the red DNA material from the subject you want to clone. Now, after some time, these cells start to multiply and they become an embryo. When the embryo is formed, they add it to the womb of the mammal that are trying to be the host. And after some time, the baby lamb is born. And just for effect, this baby has the white face instead of the black face. So there really is a clone of the original animal. And as I explained, it seems simple, but they tried it many, many times. Only after 276 attempts, they successfully reproduced one animal. And then you may ask yourself, why is this useful? How are they planning to use this? And some of the ideas is, well, if you want to mass produce some kind of animal, maybe there's it's an endangered species or something, you probably need something like cloning, because the sexual reproduction is not reliable. There are a lot of mutations. You don't know what DNA is going to land with what when you do the divisions. So if you want to reliably reproduce something in mass scale, cloning is probably one way of doing it. Also, in transplants, if you want to reduce the amount of rejection, you probably may want to clone the same organism from the person who wants to have a transplant. And there are other uses as well. Now, even though Dolly was kind of the first kind of cloning that many of us got to know, there are natural occurrences of cloning already. So for instance, was already mentioned, the twins. They have the exact same genetic code, so they are clones of each other. So that's one way of natural occurring cloning. When everybody that goes to a friend and say, hey, can I have a root or a stem from your plant? I would like to have it in my house. You're cloning the exact same genetic material from that plant and put it in your house. That's also a way of cloning. And there's also animals that can self-regenerate limbs, or so in the case of the salamander, the tail, she can make it grow again, right, by cloning, by repeating genetically that same organism. And there are other animals that are able to do that as well, like the crab and others. So what are the benefits of human cloning? Everybody needs an extra hand sometimes. Huh? Wouldn't it be nice if I could just have 10 Jussaras or 10 Tanya Swat? Tanya, where are you? That would be nice, right? 10 of you just to organize a symposium. So people have this belief that if I could just reproduce myself, then I could do much more. I could accomplish much more, right? I already mentioned about the transplants, But this is a little. We're going to see later that it's not really feasible, right? We know that the body is one thing, and the spirit that inhabits that body is something totally different, right? It's not. You cannot just reproduce the spirit, as Jesus said, right? So the water, the flesh from the flesh, but the spirit you don't know where it comes from, and so showing the different nature of the two elements. But the dangers of cloning is very real, right? Hashtag episode 8, hashtag wait for it. So people have been saying, well, if we could clone, I could clone Einstein and then have this scientist that would discover and just brave new worlds. Or if I could clone a Mozart, I could have these musicians that would create the most beautiful art. Or I could clone philosophers and have all this advance coming about. Others, less enlightened people, may say, well, I could also clone a lot of people that are violent and create the most, devastating army of all times. And it would be an army without soul, so they wouldn't suffer, and it would be merciless, right? And I think that's what's the idea behind the movie there. Other dark uses of cloning is, well, we don't have enough supply of organs like hearts or lungs. So what if we clone a bunch of people and just lock them in a storage room, and every time we needed some organ, just go there and grab it, right? So this kind of thinking, as you can see, is very disturbing, to say the least, right? So there are some dangers to human cloning. I'm not saying that we should not do cloning at all, but there's something I want to say in the end, about what is the way that we are using this technology. So the answer to this is we need to create a code of bioethics. And what that would mean is put limits in what can and cannot be done. And nowadays, the international community has agreed that human cloning is off limits for now. And the problem with that is, how do we enforce? Because there are so many rogue nations that I would do it anyway, right? Because of whatever purposes they have in mind. So what I really wanted to bring a pause in our thought here is to quote Einstein: "A science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind." So we need to, and we have the great opportunity here in Spiritism to join these two sides, right? To have a common sense, a logical view of life, and at the same time allow for the advance of science and progress. And just to quote, Bezerra de Menezes, in a response to a public challenge, a friend who was a scientist was one of his meetings, and this is one of the movies that have recently come about. He said he wanted to challenge Bezerra de Menezes to a public debate, and he said, "Well, dear friend, if you could bring even one wretched man in the world to whom materialism, or skepticism in that case, has given any moral assistance to liberate him from the marshes of suffering, we, the Spiritists, will gladly accept the challenge for our debate." So the moral suffering that is so much present in our lives, even though science may have answers for how to solve diseases, the area of moral suffering is still not in the realm of science per se. So we need, when the Spiritism or other philosophies, you really get that gap covered. So we're going to come back to this topic in a few minutes, but for now, just keep that thought.
Thank you so much to each of you. I'm sure you have questions. We have a few questions that we're going to ask now. You have portable microphones, yes? So they will stay seated. Don't forget, though, if you have questions that are not asked now, write them down, give them to our volunteers. We will have a longer Q&A later this afternoon. So let's address our first question to Jussara. If we fertilize X number of eggs, but implant only, X eggs, but implant only a few, are there other spirits connected to the other frozen embryos?
This is a question that everyone will have when we are talking about in vitro fertilization, because it's usual that normally the doctors are going to produce more eggs than actually the ones that we are going to implant. And the question is what we do with the frozen eggs. The Spiritist Medical Association have been researching a lot about that. We have several talks about that. The thing is, we have no way of knowing if there is a spirit connected to that frozen embryo or not. It would be great if you could have a device. So this goes straight with what Nahur was just explaining to us in terms of bioethics, because just to discard them as if they represented nothing, it would be perhaps a serious mistake that we can do in terms of thinking about spirits. Of course, there will be embryos that will not have spirits, but there will be others that will have spirits, and that means that if they stay frozen for 5 years, there will be a spirit connected to that. What are the implications? This is something that we have to think seriously about it.
Thank you so much. And I think as that develops, I think we will get some direction from others more advanced, huh? I hope. It's a very interesting question. Our next question goes to Sonia. How can we conciliate the genetic predisposition for certain diseases and the biological planning before reincarnation?
Okay, we already gave you a little bit overview of how DNA works, bringing the predisposition to a health status or a disease status. Now, we also know that there is a spiritual planning before we incarnate. And this spiritual planning is in accord to our karmic program through the law of cause and effect. So together with our spirit realm, our mentors, we plan what is needed in terms of our body function to fulfill that program, our karmic program. And so in that case, how can we put both together, the spiritual work and what DNA has taught us? There's no need to separate these two. And again, if you read the book, Missionaries of the Light, you're going to understand a lot better. We have a few minutes here to put this forth. But the planning starts way before. So when the karmic program is established, we know what type, if there is a need for a specific feature in our body to accomplish that program, whether it is a defect or a disease that we are going to be having or developing. So we then, during the fertilization, the mentors that will help through that reincarnation process will direct the male cell, which has the best DNA code for the needs of the structure of the body to be formed, to be magnetic faster and win the race to penetrate the female cell. So that brings the necessary DNA code for the body that's going to be formed. After that, we already talked about epigenetics, so that can also be changed further through the spirit while, during the life, during after birth. But I also want to remind that the body is formed through the mode that the spirit, the perispirit brings. So the perispirit is programmed before birth, And it comes with the energy to guide each one of the cells that are going to be forming, they're going to be dividing, forming the organs and the whole body during the prenatal period. So the body will have not only the genetic code, which was guided, but also the energetic magnetization from the perispirit, from the spirit that through the perispirit is going to be transmitted to the body to be formed.
Fascinating. I like the concept of using epigenetics and cloning in the form of prolonging life once we're here and extra parts, but before conception, getting involved at that level, I can't wrap my head around. So thank you for enlightening us a little bit more. Our next question is for Nahur. Nahur, is it possible to clone a human body, a human today? If not, will it be possible one day?
So, according to Joanna De Angelis in the book Glorious Days, it's not possible today. And actually, what I left out of the presentation, there are some other mammals that have been successfully cloned, even the monkeys. But without the participation of the spirit, the reincarnating spirit, and without the imprint of the perispirit on the multiplying cells on the embryo, there cannot be a successful cloning development, right? Now, that said, as the spirits improve their techniques, it's possible that one day a human clone will be a reality. And in that case, just like in the assisted reproduction techniques, a spirit may or may not choose to use that body. And if a spirit is associated with that body, then it will live. If not, then it will be just an accumulation of cells, like bones and blood and meat that will die, that will not survive, right?
Fascinating. Time will tell, as we say, yeah? Jussara, shouldn't we leave getting pregnant to God is the question we hear often. Why should we interfere with this process?
Well, to me, science is a blessing, is a gift from God. And we should never put a stop in progress. And so having today the possibility of helping people, helping couples that have to face infertility to go through processes that may lead to a pregnancy is actually something that should never be discarded. We, for all of those here that are parents and wanted to be parents, they know, or they have children already, they know how important it is for them to have their children in their lives. Even if they give us more gray hair, wrinkles and etc., they are a blessing in our lives, and we learn so much from each other. And so if we are receiving this opportunity, it's because we can do good with that. The problem with us, again, goes in the sense that we lack morality, we lack the spiritual understanding, and many times we use the progress that science has been bringing to us in a wrong way. Like, for instance, when we use nuclear power to make atomic bombs. And so, or if we were going to be doing cloning just to harvest organs that could be transplanted to other people. So I think we should be grateful for having this possibility and to use that whenever we have the opportunity to. So
I can see the marketing now. Come see our genetic lab for the most advanced baby possible, They'll be the smartest, the fastest, the strong, it's very scary, but yet fascinating to think that we may have that. Yes, exactly. Sonia, once the karmic planning is expressed by the genetic code in the DNA, does it turn into fate? In other words, is it no longer subjected to changes?
First of all, there's no fate. right? We learned this in Spiritism. There's no fate because we are spirits who have free will. So we can always change our program and how many times we change it, right? So as we already said, DNA gives us a propensity to a health status or to disease status. And we already discussed this a little bit. The epigenetics, the phenomena of epigenetics frequently changes that code of DNA through life as we are exposed to so many things. But the most important from the Spiritist point of view is that our will, the spirit with its thoughts, with its deeds, can change even DNA. And we have showed this. There is scientific proof of this. So, in Spiritism, this is easy to understand. But there is scientific proof. There is there work that was done with people who meditate, and they were more prone to spirituality and all that. And they actually measure. They used a very high elevated technique, sophisticated technique to look at the genes. And the genes, the good genes, were increased, and the bad genes were decreased after a few weeks of meditation. So we already have proof, scientific proof, that our thoughts, our conduct, our behavior can change the DNA planning. And so that's why when we study Spiritism and we learn the moral laws, and we learn that being good, that doing charity, through love, through, like Vanessa said this morning about doing good, right? All this has a tremendous power to change the DNA code. So there's no fate.
Thank you. Nahur, is it possible that we could bring back a loved one by cloning their body? Or could we live forever by jumping from one cloned body to another? Or could we keep perfect health by replacing defective organs by cloned ones?
So I think with the risk of preaching to the choir here, right? We cannot duplicate the spirit. God creates the spirits, and the bodies creates other bodies. So so first of all, we cannot clone human bodies yet, but assuming that was possible, right? Just by cloning someone that we loved would not bring that same spirit back. And the proof of that is that you have twins that have total different personalities. So it's the spirit who dictates the personality and chooses the body. Now, at the core of this question is a lack of understanding of the meaning of life, the ends of life, the purpose of reincarnation. So, and that's the kind of thought that leads to, let's harvest cloned bodies for organs. So it's a lack of moral understanding in the purpose of life. And so that's why it's important that we go out there and say, hey, why do you want to live forever? You already live forever. Why do you need to clone a loved one? You can already talk to a loved one. Right? So this lack of understanding of the spiritual life, which we have here, is what needs to get outside there. So that these questions change from how can we prolong the material experience of the senses, of pleasure, and avoid pain, and embrace it all as an experience of the spirit to elevate and progress. What's the meaning of suffering? Well, if you learn anything from here today, it's divine justice. True. Right? So I think the questions is interesting, but at the root of it is a lack of understanding of the spiritual realm and the spiritism and all the truths that we discuss in our Spiritist centers weekly.
So true. Thank you so much. So, Jussara, and thank you for sharing your personal experience. This is by no means personal, but I think the question is important. Is it a punishment for the couple to have to go through a process of infertility? Did they do something wrong? Why do they have to go through it?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with Spiritism, I used to say, is that there is never one single a single answer for a question. There are many reasons why we may experience infertility, many lessons to be learned, many perhaps things that we have to make amends because of previous behavior. We all know that not that long ago, when unfortunately until today we see that in some countries, you know, the way people treat children. They abuse children, they put the slavery or child labor. So, of course, those are important factors, such as abortions that can be or were committed in previous incarnations, or even as a way to teach us one thing that Jesus used to say, you know, the flesh comes from the flesh, but the spirit comes from God. And so sometimes we are so proud, we want our mini-me's, but this is not what really makes a child our child. What makes a child our child is the connection that we have with this child, is the connection that we have with the spirit, is how willing we are going to be to actually learn from this relationship. Because it is a difficult relationship. It's a difficult process to have different spirits living under the same roof and one learning from each other. So perhaps we could say, yeah, it has something to do with how we act in the past, but also it can be a blessing because it's going to teach us to love everyone regardless if they come from our blood or not. And this is when, again, we mention the fact of adoption, because in Spiritism we know that nothing happens for chance. And if a child comes to you, whether through a natural process or whether through adoption, this is your child. It's nobody else's child. So it is an opportunity for the couple and for the child to love one another with true love, with real love that goes beyond blood ties.
Wonderful.
Bloodly ties.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sonia, from the spiritual point of view, is it acceptable to change the genetic code to improve health or to prevent diseases?
Okay, this topic shares a little bit what Nahur was talking about, but I would like to bring two concepts. First of all, the spirits through Kardec told us that we must progress two different things, morally and intellectually. So we have this obligation to continue making things better, not just for us, but for the future, and because we are co-creators. The other concept that's very important that we learn through Kardec is that nothing happens without God's permission. Everything happens with God's permission and with a purpose. So in the case of changing genetic code, what I see is what is behind that? What is the reason? What is the purpose? If the purpose is a good one, it will probably be successful. So I have seen so many what we call gene therapy already in place, already helping for diseases that previously were like incurable diseases. And the other day, I saw a very interesting example. Actually, it was in the Brazilian TV, so people here may have seen it. But was a young girl. She was like 3 years old, and she was born with a type of very severe anemia called sickle cell disease. It was so severe that she needed blood transfusion every week. So, you know, she would have a very short life due to all the consequences of that. Well, the doctors presented the couple with a potential solution. And the solution was to create embryos from that same couple because she needed a perfect transplantation. Perfect. That would be so, the cells would be so similar that would not be discarded. So they proposed to create an embryo that they would screen to see that didn't have that genetic code for the disease. And then they implanted that embryo, and the couple had a healthy boy. When the boy was born, they took just the material from the umbilical cord and make a full transplant on the girl, and she's cured. This was amazing. It was an act of love, and the girl, she's so young, and she says, "I love my little brother." Of course, she is now cured of a disease through genetic technology. So sometimes we see only the bad things that could happen, but as Nahur said, there are so many good things that could mitigate suffering, could decrease the incidence of diseases, could make life better for others. And when the purpose is love behind it, God will always permit.
Wonderful. So true. So for our last question, Nahur, you have the responsibility of bringing it home for us, okay? No pressure, though. Some scientists claim that not experimenting with genetics and cloning is anti-ethical, for doing otherwise would doom humanity to extinction. What is the view of Spiritism about the need for bioethics, the future of human cloning and humanity in general, sir?
So I recently watched this talk at TED, and this guy saying, what will human bodies look like in 100 years? And the problem they are trying to tackle is human survival as a species. So don't get me wrong, I am in favor of science, and I think the contributions in genetics, in cloning, and assisted reproduction, they are raising the level of the material life so it can match our psychological development as a spirit. So we don't need to suffer as much with diseases like tuberculosis and cancer or other diseases like that. So God allows for science to progress for a reason. Now, going back to this point, he was saying that if we do not research in how our lungs can breathe the air in Mars, for instance, we know that planet Earth one day will, stop, be destroyed. So then we'll be dooming the humanity as a race to extinction, right? And the next solar system close to us is thousands of years away. So we will need a way to transplant or transport this to space. So they're coming from a place of common good. They just lack this understanding that we already can be born in other planets. We already have the ability to be transported to other solar systems as a spirit. We already have in this planet spirits who are coming from other systems to have an experience here. How else can we explain the population growth from the initial of civilization to now, right? We cannot be reincarnating, like that. That doesn't work that way, right? So, what the contribution of Spiritism is exactly that, showing the spiritual side of things. It's very interesting when you look at evolution, and I love this topic, and the book, The Pathway to the Light by Emmanuel described it so beautifully. And then recently, I compared that with a philosopher and historian called Gerard Hurd, and he also has the same kind of description of evolution. So from the unicellular beings to the multicellular beings, and then the fish, and then reptiles, and the giant reptiles, and then the mammals. What you see in evolution is some kind of steps. Every time you go from one stage to the other, there's a increase, a linear progress, and then there's some stagnation, maybe even some degradation there.
And what happens is that specialized being, say the fish, after conquering the peak of that realm, like the shark that can eat everybody else, right, the top of the chain, then it starts growing limbs or mass that is useless. It's just spending energy uselessly. And then there's a breakthrough. And then the raptors come along because the fins become limbs and they get out of the water, and so forth. We are at a stage now in humanity where we have reached this kind of plateau. We have the most advanced technology, even to reproduce, a human being, change genetics. We understand our body. We have the most advanced technology, and yet there's a crisis of mental health, depression, psychosis, and other suffering. This suffering is something that science cannot yet respond to and answer. That's what Bezerra was talking about. This will come with expansion of conscience. So if you go to the unicellular, to the other beings, what you see through all along is conscience is being developed and growing until we reach humanity, our current stage with reason, right? So instinct and then reason. And at this stage, what is lacking now is this expansion of conscience to get out of selfishness and be more altruistic. Get out of living only a life of matter and physical pleasure to a life of we are happy by the happiness we spread. We are happy by the contribution we make to the world. We communicate with the spirits in the upper realm and get our gratification from that. In other ways, we live the spiritual life while still here, through meditation, to prayer, to charity work, to mediumship, all these ways that you can find in the Spiritist Center. Guess what? We need to bring more people to the Spiritist Center and show them this reality that is lacking in the world.
And I couldn't wrap it up any better, but I need each of you to make a commitment, if you wish. I can't make you do this, but I'm hoping that you join me at the 31st Symposium, all right, 20 years from now, so that we can see how all of this plays out, okay? Can you do that for me? Yes? All right.
So,
Please, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.